In late September, the sequel to the critically acclaimed Shadow of Mordor was released, and let's be honest, it chalked up to be much less than we expected. I only just recently got around to finishing it because I couldn't bring myself to go through hours of playing through mediocre quests, exploring bland open world areas, and grinding my ass off just to get to the end of the lackluster story. Don't get me wrong, the game has its good points, such as the widely expanded Nemesis system. I also found that Talion's abilities felt great to use and you could really become incredibly powerful. Unfortunately, the bad weighs out the good with Shadow of War, and today we're going to be discussing one of the greatest disasters in AAA video games, and the lost potential of Middle-earth Shadow of War. To be able to determine what went wrong with Shadow of War, we need to look at the time before the game was released, when everyone was excited for the game. Well, the game was first announced in February 2017, and the first trailer for the game got a great reception. Warner Bros. Shared no expense with this initial trailer and showed things fans wanted to see for a while. Talion and Celebrimbor were back, there were new characters to meet, environments to explore, and enemies to defeat. Everything seemed like it was going to be amazing. Shadow of Mordor was loved by consumers and got incredibly good ratings, so the sequel was bound to be good, right? I mean, the Nemesis system was returning, the game had deeper RPG elements, Talion had more abilities than ever before, and they added in a new fort system. There was no way this game was gonna fail. Or was there? As more gameplay and trailers were released, the hype built and built, until it reached its breaking point. Warner Bros. Didn't seem to stop releasing these teasers, trailers, and demos, as well as the weekly streams for the game, so there was way too much of the game being shown. It even got to a point where they were releasing a trailer for each tribe, which was a little bit ridiculous. But by the time the game released, we already knew so much about the game that the sense of wonder had been lost, and we were left with a bad taste in our mouth due to all of the non-stop marketing for the game leading up to its release. To put this into perspective, if we look at the Shadow of Mordor trailers playlist on the Shadow of War YouTube channel, we can see that there are 15 videos in the playlist, and some of them are duplicates that were put in there accidentally, and some being trailers for post-launch content after the game was released. Whereas if we look at the playlist for Shadow of War, there are 25 videos, and a whole separate playlist for the streams that developers did leading up to the game's launch. They showed so much of the game before it came out that there was little left to the imagination, hence many people's hype for the game dying down. And oh boy, the announcement of loot boxes prior to the game's release was the cherry on the cake. With the game's reputation already stained before it even came out, things were looking bleak for Shadow of War. And my god, were we right. The game was mechanically good. In fact, it was better in terms of gameplay than its predecessor. But where it fell short was story, open world, and side content. I was really hoping for more of a narrative-driven game than the first one, because, let's be honest, the first game had a pretty lackluster story too, but it made up for that with innovation and a great world to explore. Shadow of War was definitely more story-driven, but the sections of story we got to play were bland and uninspired. The characters were boring, the overall story felt rushed, and the narrative in general was structured and paced in a really odd way. Don't get me started on Act 3 and 4 though. Act 3 is actually really enjoyable. It had heavy amounts of story, an interesting direction, and the sections of gameplay were fun. But this was all thrown away in Act 4, which was literally just a 10-hour grind fest in which you defend fort after fort after fort. It's so obvious that Act 4 was literally just a way to push loot boxes, because up until that point, there was nothing that made me even feel pressured into buying them at all. Also, given the true ending of the game is locked behind the 10 hours of grinding, it's safe to say that Warner Bros. Obviously thought hard about how they were going to force players to buy loot boxes just to get the actual ending of the game faster. It's not even like this section is particularly difficult either. All you do is defend a fort and dominate every single enemy war chief that comes in, and you'll be good to go. It's just that it takes such a long time that it wears you out. I had to take many breaks during my time playing the Shadow Wars, and that's saying something. I played Destiny 1 for a total of 1,600 hours or more, and that game was an absolute grind fest. So the fact that I had to take breaks from Shadow Wars so I could keep my sanity really tells you something about how bad it actually is. And although Act 3 was good, Act 1 and 2 were so boring. Yeah, there were cool moments here and there with the Witch King doing stuff and Talion doing badass stuff, but on the whole the missions were boring and repetitive, and the small sections of story that there were pretty dull too. The open worlds in Shadow of War really aren't that great either. You'd think that having 5 individual open world spaces would be a good thing, but honestly each of them are so bland and generic that it made me want to gouge my eyes out. I like the idea of having a diverse range of places to explore, but why have them as separate open worlds? Couldn't Warner Brothers have just done the same thing as Horizon Zero Dawn, in which there are loads of different looking areas in one big open world, opposed to splitting them up into seamless regions? I think it would have gone a long way in terms of immersion for one, and also exploration. Instead of having 5 pretty shit open worlds to explore, you now have one really big mediocre open world to explore with forts dotted around the map that you can defend and conquer. Plus it means that you wouldn't have to have a loading screen when traveling between regions, which you have to do a lot. That finally brings us to the side content. Honestly, the Nemesis system is great. It really helps the Middle-earth games stand out from other open-world games, and they've expanded on it greatly in Shadow of War. There are a more diverse range of orcs that had different names, tribes, abilities, voices, and overall design, and there was also the introduction of Olog High, which added a whole new set of archetypes of enemy into the pool. I really do commend the hard work that went into the Nemesis system, because I did have hours of fun just dominating orcs and building my army to take on the region's 4. However, all of the work put into the Nemesis system was thrown away with the Shadow Wars. If you spend the entire game dominating orcs and making sure they level up like I did, it doesn't even matter. The orcs you face in the Shadow Wars are always higher level than the orcs in your army, so no matter how much effort you put into the Nemesis system, it doesn't make a difference. As long as Talion is a high enough level in the Shadow Wars, you can just dominate the high level enemy orcs that are invading the fort, and there you go. You've got a lot of high level orcs with no effort whatsoever. So no matter how impressive the Nemesis system is, it's made completely redundant. If you invest time into it, you get no payoff whatsoever. And if the Nemesis system means nothing, the rest of the game means nothing too. Now we've established the main reasons why Shadow of War failed, let's talk about what it should have been if it were handled a bit better. I think that one of the main problems and the thing that slowed the overall flow of the game was the way the missions were structured. There were so many filler missions in the game opposed to being missions that were enjoyable. A lot of them consisted of go here, kill 10 of these orcs, and then you're done. There was nothing fun or interesting about the missions in the game, and I actually found myself just listening to music while doing them opposed to actually caring about the content of each quest. Shadow of War definitely needed better mission structure that made the game feel like an actual war between the Bright Lord and Sauron, but instead it just felt like all the progress that was made in Shadow of Mordor was undone and they had to start again. I also would have liked to see way more of the internal struggle between Talion and Celebrimbor. It definitely was touched upon in multiple sections of the game, however it wasn't ever delved into deep enough, and the sections that it was highlighted just felt like Talion and Celebrimbor were children having an argument. There was no weight to anything that happened either, because they both just got over it right after the cutscene anyway, and it wasn't ever mentioned again. It was more awkward than anything. Act 3 on the whole was pretty good for story, and I actually enjoyed that section of the game greatly. However, the rest of the game wasn't good for story, and that's what let it down as a whole. But if there's one thing I'd change more than anything in the game, it's gotta be the Shadow Wars. Act 4 was a disgrace of game design. Not only was it just there to push microtransactions, but it was so obvious too. It was basically a big fuck you to consumers from Warner Brothers. It was one of the worst experiences I've had in any game to this day, and Warner Brothers should be ashamed that they even implemented it into an experience that had so much potential. If Act 4 carried on and improved on the storytelling in Act 3, it might have saved the overall experience from a story perspective, but instead they made the finale of the game a glorified tower defense game, and it ruined the whole experience in my eyes. If Act 4 was story driven, had a final boss, and had interesting linear segments like some open world games have been known to do, it would have made for a much more interesting ending that would generally be way more enjoyable. We didn't even get a final conclusion to Talion and Celebrimbor. They just both never saw each other again after Act 3, which I find really odd. It's almost like they forgot to write it in. I would have liked to see a Talion versus Celebrimbor final boss, in which Talion uses the ring he got from the Ring Wraith to match Celebrimbor's Wraith abilities in the final fight. Then Talion could have set Celebrimbor free to join his family in death, opposed to just being a blue light flying out of Sauron's tower and Talion dying with no conclusion to the bond they had. It would have had way more emotional weight and would have felt like a proper ending, opposed to the lazy ending of the actual game where they just linked it to the movies and then Talion died. The whole of the ending of the game seemed completely rushed. In fact, the majority of the game felt completely rushed, which was why I didn't enjoy it for the most part. The game should have been so much more, given the astounding success of Shadow of Mordor, but it just wasn't what we hoped for in the end. Overall, Shadow of War is a prime example of missed potential in a video game. With the success they had with the first game and the fanbase that was formed as a result of that success, you would have thought they would deliver an experience that met every expectation of fans. But instead we got a void, uninspired, dull mess of a game that deserved to be so much more than what it was. Shadow of War should have been the next major installment into a popular open world series, with a feeling of pure awe at the scale of the war that was happening in Middle-earth. But instead, all we got was a series of hit and misses. That's the end of the video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed. This video has taken me fucking ages to make, way longer than it was probably worth, but I wanted to finish this video so I can get on to reviewing and talking about all the new games that are coming out recently, because there's been a lot, such as Monster Hunter World, Kingdom Come Deliverance, you know, there's a few that have come out that I want to make videos on, so stay tuned for those in the future. Thank you guys so much for watching this one. A like would be much appreciated. Comment down in the comment section below if you disagree, and yeah, that's basically it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.